Chapter 26, Digestive System, Part 2. Now, this series of screencasts will be focusing on the lower GI. Now, one thing that I do want to note that is covered in our textbook is the actual digestion of specific nutrients such as carbohydrate, protein, and lipids. This is not something that you are responsible for. Now, we're first going to start talking about the lower GI tract. And when we look at the organs of the GI tract, primarily it is the small intestine. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is the small intestine is the primary organ of digestion and absorption. So many of these processes are occurring within the lower GI tract. The other thing that's happening is once we have completely digested and absorbed foodstuffs, anything left over that was not able to be absorbed or undigested is going to be eliminated as feces. The small intestine is divided into three continuous regions, and they are the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Now, our textbook puts the duodenum in the upper GI. I choose to not do so. I'm going to think of everything of the small intestine to be in the lower GI. And what the duodenum actually does, it's going to receive chyme from the stomach. And it also, this is the area of the small intestine where secretions from the accessory organs are going to basically make their way into the small intestine. Now, the small intestine is where the majority of chemical digestion and absorption is taking place. We have a number of accessory digestive organs, and they're responsible for the secretion of bile and pancreatic juice. Bile is produced by the liver. It is stored and concentrated within the gallbladder. And also we have pancreatic juice, which are digestive enzymes secreted from the exocrine pancreas. And note, all of these secretions will funnel their way into the duodenum of the small intestine. Then we have the large intestine, and the primary digestive function associated with the large intestine is the absorption of water, electrolytes, and some vitamins. Also, this is where feces is produced and eliminated through the anus. Now, there are a number of diseases out there that we are starting to see more of, and this is one of the reasons why I am starting to be more interested within the digestive system. It definitely goes beyond transport across an epithelial layer. Some of these autoimmune conditions that are tied in with the lower GI tract include inflammatory bowel disease, and this is an autoimmune disorder both with regions of the small intestine. There's Crohn's disease. This is something we see in young adults. And what this consists of is intermittent and relapsing episodes of cramping and diarrhea. There's ulcerative colitis, and this is very similar to Crohn's, but it does not involve the small intestine and is limited to the large intestine. Now, when we look at irritable bowel disease, this is something that is impacting 20% of all Americans. It results in abnormal function of the colon. Like most other autoimmune disorders, women are more impacted than men. Symptoms associated with irritable bowel disease are cramps, bloating, constipation, and diarrhea. This is a condition that will be treated with diet, medication, and also stress reduction. Now, the first organ that we are going to address is the small intestine. You may also hear it referred to as the small bowel. Now, if we were to kind of give the small intestine its name based on anatomical characteristics, long intestine might actually be a better term for it. Small actually refers to the diameter of the tube in comparison to the large intestine, which will be shorter and have a much larger diameter. Now, once again, it is the long tube inferior to the stomach, and it is located medially within the abdominal cavity. Ingested nutrients typically will spend up to 12 hours within the small intestine, and that makes sense. We have a long structure. Foodstuff, chyme, will spend a long time here, and that is just going to allow for maximal digestion and absorption. Now, what's happening within the small intestine is going to be the absorption of most nutrients and a large percentage of water, electrolytes, and vitamins. Now, if we look at the gross anatomy of the small intestine, it is a coiled, thin-walled tube. It extends from the pylorus to the cecum of the large intestine, and there are three segments, and they are the duodenum, jejunum, ileum, and that is the order in which they are. The duodenum, that is the first segment of the small intestine. It originates at the pyloric sphincter. It is continuous with the jejunum, and this is the part of the small intestine that actually is receiving the acidic contents from the stomach. It also is the area where all of the secretions of accessory glands, the liver, gallbladder, and the pancreas actually make their way into the GI tract. So everything is funneling into the duodenum of the small intestine. The jejunum, this is the middle region of the small intestine. It accounts for 2/5 of the total length of small intestine. Now, you're not responsible for these lengths and how much of the small intestine is either the duodenum, jejunum, or ileum. This is the primary region for chemical digestion and the absorption of nutrients. The ileum, that is the distal region of the small intestine. It accounts for 3/5 of the small intestine, and it terminates at the ileocecal valve. This is the sphincter that is controlling entry of materials into the large intestine, and it continues the absorption of digested material. Now, one of the things that I have addressed to a really large degree are mucosal adaptations. And the small intestine is really the best example we have of this. And keep in mind, think about the length of the structure, and that is going to result in really efficient digestion and absorption. But it goes beyond that. If we look at the mucosa, we find these circular folds. And these are internal folds of both the mucosal and submucosal tunics of the small intestine. Now, the role of these circular folds is to increase the surface area, and this is going to increase nutrient absorption. Now, we can think of these as speed bumps, and they actually are slowing down the movement of chyme. And when that happens, you're looking at more efficient digestion and absorption. Now, they are most numerous in the duodenum and the jejunum, much less in the ileum, because once again, most digestion and absorption is actually happening within the middle portion or the jejunum of the small intestine. Now, here, which is very characteristic of the small intestine, are structures known as villi. They are larger and most numerous within the jejunum, and we want to think of them as finger-like projections of the mucosa. Now, think back to the tunic layer that we went over in our digestive anatomy lab. And what the villi do is increase, once again, the surface area for absorption and secretion. And within the villi, this is where we're going to see an arterial, capillary network, and the venule. Now, we also will see a lacteal. And what a lacteal is, that's a lymphatic capillary within the villus, and that is going to be primarily responsible for the absorption of lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins. We also have microvilli, and these are extensions of the plasma membrane, and they are simple columnar epithelial cells. They also result in increasing the surface area of the small intestine, and they form anatomically what is referred to as a microscopic brush border. Now, various enzymes are embedded here, and they are referred to as brush border enzymes. And there also will be proteins for the transport of digestion products. They are also found here. Now, if we look at the image here, looking at a few different structures that we expect to find within the villus, we see the microvilli. We see goblet cells, which are responsible for the production of mucus. We see unicellular glands, and they are synthesizing enteropeptidase, and enteroendocrine cells, which are responsible for the secretion of hormones that are produced within the small intestine. Now, once again, motility is an especially important topic, and when we look at the smooth muscle of the small intestine, it primarily mixes chyme with glandular secretions. And here we're talking about segmentation, and this is a backward and forward motion, which results in the movement of chyme against these areas of the brush border. contents of the small intestine will be propelled through the small intestine through peristalsis. Now, segmentation, this happens early in the intestinal phase, and this is mixing the chyme with the secretions coming from the accessory glands and also juices and secretions that are produced by the intestines itself. These contractions are very organized and coordinated, so once again, they will be initiated by pacemaker cells, and they're going to spread through the muscularis via gap junctions. Peristalsis, this is going to be most prevalent in late parts of the intestinal phase. It is going to be initiated by the hormone motilin, and this is actually going to be released from the duodenum of the small intestine. This hormone results in successive waves of contractions, and you have this basically migrating motility complex. And this movement will continue until all contents have made their way into the large intestine. Now, moving chyme from the small intestine into the large intestine is known as the gastroileal reflex. I know this sounds weird that we're talking about the stomach, but when we look at the gastroileal reflex, it is due to contraction of the ileum. The ileocecal sphincter will relax. This is aided by the hormone cholecystokinin, or CCK, and this results in a relaxation of the cecum. We now see contents moved from the ileum to the cecum in response to food in the stomach, hence gastroileal reflex. And the ileocecal valve, it's going to contract to prevent the backflow back into the small intestine.